Welcome to another edition of RSG Insider, our podcast series about the work we do at RSG and communities. And today I'm very excited to be joined by my colleague Dominique Clark, who is a director with the firm. We're going to be talking about tax increment financing in California, which was something was very robust a long time ago when we had redevelopment agencies, took a bit of a pause when those were eliminated, has slowly and gradually picked up. And so there's a lot of communities that we work for that are asking us about it, that are asking us to help them form these districts or evaluate them. And so today we're going to talk about how we do that at our firm in case it's something that's of interest to you. So Dominique, tell us a little about yourself and what you do at RSG.
Yeah, so like you said, I'm a director. I've been with the firm for 10 years, since 2013. And I've worked on some form of tax increment financing pretty much since I started in 2013.
Right. And, for those that are unfamiliar with tax increment financing, how would you describe it to them? I mean, it sounds, right off the bat, when you say tax, people think that they're gonna raise my taxes. So
Right.
tax increment financing, tell us what it is.
Yeah, so in a nutshell, tax increment financing is a revenue generating tool that public agencies use to fund redevelopment, infrastructure, and other community development projects. In my opinion, what makes it hard to both explain and understand tax increment financing is there's a lot of terms, a lot of lingo that's involved that you kind of have to know. So I'll try to explain it as I go through. But basically, tax increment financing starts when you establish an area as a tax increment financing district, or TIF district as it's commonly referred to. So you look at what are the values, the total assessed values of all the property in the district as of the time it's established, and that's called the base year assessed value for the district. So then, of course, over time, the values go beyond the base year assessed value because new construction is happening, the value of existing properties is going up over time. And so the difference between the present day assessed value and the base year value is called the incremental assessed value. And the taxes on that incremental assessed value is tax increment.
Yeah.
So tax increment financing is the diversion of some or all of that tax increment from the local public agencies to the TIF district itself to fund community and economic development in that area. So when a TIF district works well, the idea is that the growth in that district generates funding for redevelopment back into the district, which then increases values, which generates more funds. So you're creating this exponential cycle of growth and community development investment.
Right. And without raising tax rates.
Exactly. Right. Yes.
Most importantly.
Yes, it's just diversion. It's
Yeah.
diversion of existing
Taxes that you would otherwise already be paying.
Exactly.
So I kind of teed it up at the beginning about redevelopment and how tax increment was back in the day. Can you talk a little bit about how you've witnessed it change over time?
Yes. So in California, tax increment financing has changed dramatically in the last 15 years. So before 2012, California cities and counties could create what were called redevelopment agencies, which created tax increment financing districts. And basically, under redevelopment, pretty much all the local public agencies contributed to that district. So they would contribute a share of their tax increment to the district unless they had negotiated some kind of alternative agreement. But so for the most part, we're talking the county, the city, the school districts, the utility districts, the library, they all participated.
Yeah. And that's different now.
Yes.
Intentionally by the state legislature.
Right.
In some important ways. So can you talk about how it's different today?
Yes. So in 2012, California dissolved all the redevelopment agencies, in large part because of the concern of diverting all of this funding from local public agencies, especially schools. And so since 2012, the California state legislature has created new forms of TIF districts. And there's multiple types, but I think the key takeaways are that they don't generate the same amount of tax increment as they did under redevelopment purposefully. because it was kind of seen that too much of that funds were being diverted. And so it's allowed, but on a smaller scale. So there's different types of these new TIF districts, but the most common ones are EIFDs and CRIAs. And both of those are acronyms. EIFD standing for Enhanced Infrastructure Financing District, and CRIAs are Community Revitalization and Investment Authorities.
Right. And so we have these districts and are these tools to create these districts now. How would they be, different? Well, let's first talk. I want to go back to something you said earlier because I think it's important to point out. We talk a lot about well, it's not redevelopment because they don't get the school's share.
Right.
But I think in truth, as you kind of alluded to, in redevelopment, while they could not, they didn't have to opt in like they do today,
Right.
all districts,
Right.
and school districts cannot opt in at all.
Right.
Even when that option wasn't available and you were sort of forced into this, if you will, through redevelopment formation, you could negotiate agreements. And I worked on projects personally where those agreements took, as much as 100% of the tax revenue away from that particular agency's share. In other words, if you had the county participating, in fact, if they were keeping all of their money instead of it going into the district, they really weren't participating at the end.
Right.
So I think sometimes we lose sight of that, as we talk about it today. It doesn't seem to be as prolific as it once was, and I think that's why we're seeing more and more of these districts get created. So talk a little bit more about how and what kinds of funds can be used, because I think that's another thing that's different about these new districts is that it's not just that tax increment revenue, but other revenue they potentially can use.
Yeah. I think it's important that you pointed out the differences between EIFDs and redevelopment agencies. So EIFDs can fund a broad range of infrastructure, so parks and libraries and roads and bridges, all of that. They can also form a wide variety of economic development projects, and that includes affordable housing, that includes environmental mitigation, includes all kinds of things. But that is a big difference, is that with EIFDs, you have to opt in rather than opting out. So the default is that no one participates, and then you have to convince public agencies to participate and willingly give up part of their tax increment, which is an uphill battle.
Right.
But like you said, something that EIFDs can do that redevelopment agencies couldn't is they can collect more than tax increment. So they can, for example, collect property taxes in lieu of vehicle licensing fees, VLF. They can also collect Mello-Roos special taxes, RPTTF, Redevelopment Property Tax Trust Fund, another acronym.
Yeah,
They
of course,
can,
everybody all knows.
yeah, there's not enough acronyms.
Yeah.
So yeah, they can contribute that after, ROPS obligations are paid and other obligations. And then also they can contribute sales taxes if it's used for affordable housing that meets certain criteria that's specified in the law.
Right. Yeah, and there's like about, I think 8 or so different types of tax increment financing districts. The most common, of which is an EIFD.
Right.
So, how does the jurisdiction form an EIFD? How would you describe that to somebody?
Yeah. So on paper, it's very straightforward. What the law says is that the jurisdiction has to create what's called an infrastructure financing plan, which includes everything you'd want to know about the district, right? Like, what are the boundaries? What agencies are participating, how much of their share are they giving up, how much tax increment can it collect over time, what projects will be funded, all of that. And then you also have to hold a series of public hearings, which as long as the majority of the community doesn't protest you forming the district, that's it. Those are the steps that are in the law.
Right.
But the reality is a lot of the work is what happens before those steps, or what should happen before those steps at least, which is figuring out what are we going to fund with this district? Can we generate the revenue that we hope we can in order to complete these projects? And then convincing other public agencies to participate. That's the hard work.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think, an agency or a community that's thinking about this, it's important to consider what's the selling point to not just your jurisdiction. Most of the times we see it's a city that's starting this up, right? Because they're thinking about their land use and what they want to do for economic development or affordable housing or infrastructure. And they're trying to think about how do we make this change. And you kind of need to open, your view up a little bit wider to consider what about these same things, with how much would that matter to, say, the county or a special district that we're trying to attract? It's got to be something in it for those other agencies as well to get out of it, right? For it to make some sense.
Right.
So we talked about EIFDs, and then maybe the next one we mentioned is a CRIA, C-R-I-A, a CRIA. How are those different from EIFDs, would you say?
Yeah, so CRIAs are very similar to EIFDs, but there are some key differences. So one is where you can create these districts. So at EIFD, you can pretty much create anywhere. You can do it in an affluent community, you can do it in an under-resourced community, pretty much anywhere. CRIAs is not the case. You have to meet very specific criteria in order to even be eligible to create one. So there are multiple criteria that you can meet. One is to be on a former military base. One is to have a community with a demonstrated economic challenges and physical deterioration. Another one is you have sites that are either designated for transit priority projects, or they're deemed in the local housing element to be suitable for housing. And then another is to be deemed a disadvantaged community under the California Environmental Protection Agency. So it's very specific where it can go. That's one key difference. Another key difference is that CRIAs have eminent domain authority, which can be very important for some, but depending on what you're trying to do, right? And then another key difference is that CRIAs have a requirement that 25% of all tax increment collected must be used for affordable housing.
Right. So that's kind of so while an EIFD can do that, there's a specific requirement on how much this is being used for affordable housing. Yeah, and I think it's kind of baked into the name, right? Community revitalization. It's just that if you kind of just remember those first two words, it kind of tells you where it's probably going to go. It's not going to go in every community. It's going to go in certain areas where that investment is particularly needed, and it comes with it more than just the financing tools, but these other things to address some of the problems that you were mentioning that have to exist within the area. How many of these districts, we are in July of 2024, and I mentioned that because it seems like it's changing all the time. I think, 5 years ago, you would asked us how many districts were formed in California. I think it's like 1 or 2. And then maybe 3 years ago, I think we did a count, and it was somewhere around 10. And now, how many do we have today?
So for CRIAs, my understanding is we have 1.
Yeah.
And it's in Victorville, and it was created about a year and a half ago as of today, in February 2023. So it's too soon to tell how much revenue it's generating. For EIFDs, it's a different story. We have about 30. And even with those, it's hard to tell how many are generating revenue or how much, because about half of those, almost half, were created in the last 2 years.
Yeah.
So it's still too soon to tell. And then different counties are publishing different data. So some are very open about how much the EIFDs are generating, and others are not so much. But I can say that in the city of San Diego, which is one of the oldest EIFDs, they in their first, so it was established in July 2017, and in the first 5 years, they generated $8.7 million of tax increment revenue. They're approved to generate up to $1.1 billion.
Yeah.
So they still got a ways to go, which I think is an important thing to remember with this is tax increment generation in significant numbers takes time. Like that's the whole way that this works, is it's exponential over time.
Yeah, I want to say there's one agency that we're aware of that they've only generated like $100 or so in their first year.
Yeah. Nobody really talks about that, but yes, yes, that does happen in the first years. So if you want to
So it's a long-term financing strategy.
Absolutely.
And people need to look at it that way.
Absolutely.
And also it needs to be, there needs to be a lot of thought put into what's in the area that you're trying to do, as well as with projects that you want to do. And that really gets to, I think, maybe how we help our clients form and evaluate, or even consider evaluating. I consider doing an EIFD or a CRIA or some other tool. So can you talk a little bit about like what we do for some of our clients?
Yeah. So like you said, a lot of people are hearing about this and nobody wants to be missing out. And so we get a lot of questions from our clients, like, should we be creating an EIFD? Should we do a CRIA? And so we help them because this is an investment of time to create one. And again, it's a diversion of taxes. So you're diverting it from, if you're a city, your general fund to this district. So before they go down that formation process, we help them analyze, will this even generate the amount of revenue that you think it will, that you
Right.
hope it will? We hope it will too, but we
Yeah.
have to look at the numbers, right? So for example, the city of El Monte, we helped them try to figure out whether it would make sense for them to create one of these TIF districts. And so we created 4 different boundary scenarios for the district. And then we were able to project how much revenue they would generate under each boundary scenario, depending on whether or not other public agencies participated. And then we looked at what projects they wanted to fund, and we were able to tell them what's the most appropriate type of district based on what you're trying to do if you do go down this route. And then also there are some cities and counties that are developing policies for when they will or will not contribute to an EIFD proposed by another public agency.
Right.
And so we've helped, for example, the city of LA, they did a policy several years ago. We helped them draft that policy, and right now we're actually helping them revise it based on their current goals and the recent legislative changes.
Yeah.
And I should mention, I'm giving a broad overview of EIFDs and CRIAs. So if somebody wants to know more of the nuances and technicalities, I'd recommend they go to the website of CalEd, which is the California Association of Local Economic Development. And on there, they have an economic development resources tab, and they have a whole page there on TIF tools, including EIFDs, CRIAs, the other ones I didn't even talk about at all. And they have a lot of really good resources there, including like graphics of how to form these step by step and all of that.
Yeah, and we were proud to be able to help out in the creation of some of that content for CalEd. We're very proud CalEd members, so that's great that you gave them that plug. All right, I'm gonna put you on the spot, Dom.
Okay.
I want you to think of maybe your top 3 things that you would suggest, or your 3 top tips for a community that's thinking about doing a EIFD or CRIA. What would you suggest?
Okay, my 3 top tips. I'd say 1 is don't create one of these TIF districts before running the numbers to make sure that it's going to generate what you think it will. Because again, I'll say it again, you're diverting funds from potentially your general fund in order to go to this district, which makes sense sometimes, but it doesn't make sense all the time. And I think an ideal TIF district is one where you're generating development that would not have happened but for the creation of this district.
Right.
And ultimately, you're going to generate more tax revenue for your jurisdiction than you're sacrificing in the short term.
Right.
So that's my top tip. My second tip is make sure that you're picking the one that fits what you're trying to do. So if eminent domain authority would be helpful for you, don't create an EIFD because they don't have that authority.
Right.
Consider creating a CRIA, right? And then also consider the other types of non-TIF districts like CFDs, community facilities districts. That might be a better fit as well.
Right.
And a third tip I would say, and you touched on this earlier, is to think about the regional significance of the projects that will be funded by this district.
Right.
Because one of these districts makes sense if you can get more than one public agency contributing to it. And the most compelling way to do that is to say that the projects that we're going to fund with this district doesn't just benefit my community, it benefits our whole region.
Right.
And that's a great way to get the county on board, for example, and maybe even some other public agencies. And I know you asked for 3, but I'll give you a bonus tip.
Okay.
Which is,
I'll take it.
Keep an eye on the law because it's always changing because
Yeah.
all of these tools are new. So even in the last few years after these have been established, the state legislature has been figuring out ways to make them more usable for more communities. And so they're constantly updating the law.
Absolutely. Okay. I'll take the 4th tip. That's great. We'll take that bonus. And I really wanted to thank you, Dom, for coming today and sharing some of your thoughts about EIFDs. You've been a great expert with us and joining our team and talking about this today. This is another edition of RSG Insider, our podcast series talking about what we do at RSG and helping communities in California. If you're interested to learn more about the company, check out our RSG website, rsgsolutions.com, or look forward to more podcasts available for you coming soon. Thanks again.
Thank you.